You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. What's up, everybody? We are back in action after just a week from the last episode. We decided just to pound out another episode here. And we do have an interesting kind of project that we have today. As you can probably tell from the title of the episode, we are doing a tier list, which is the first time we've done one on this podcast. So what we're doing is we're ranking the best extreme metal albums from the year 2000 to present. And with that, we thought it would be too difficult to do like the best extreme metal albums from the past 10 years because honestly, I mean, the general consensus of the specific group here is that there wasn't really much quality released in the past 10 years, so there would be a lot less albums. So we decided to just do it from the year 2000 to present. And with that, so it's after the period where, you know, extreme metal has shat the bed. Like if you look up like the best black metal albums ever on the Google, 90% of those will be in the 90s, as well as death metal. A lot of those would be like late 80s to early 90s. So the peak of extreme metal, going by the wisdom of Google and the wisdom of crowds, would be that there's substantially a lot more great releases before the year 2000. So we thought it'd just be an interesting little project here to rank the best albums from the year 2000 to present. And each one of us, we did recommend albums here. So what you see on the screen, if you're on the YouTube, is the list at the bottom of the album covers that we view as, you know, being quite exceptional. You know, we may have differing opinions on some of these albums, which we'll definitely get into as we start ranking them. And I do want to make it clear that this is the best of extreme metal albums list. So if something is ranked in F, it doesn't mean it's inherently bad. This is really something that at least one person on the crew here, they think it qualifies to be one of the best extreme metal albums. So so there may be something ranked in the F later on, which I did give a forewarning about that. But anyway, let's go ahead and start here. So we do have Shelly returning, Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Thank you, Shelly.
Hello, yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And we also have the infamous Tyler, who, if you guys listened to last week's episode about OSDM, where we shared snippets of OSDM bands, Tyler was on a roll there for a while guessing what they were. So Tyler, how was your wine tasting that you had after the blind tasting?
It went pretty well. Had quite a few glasses of wine. Fortunately, I wasn't driving, so that worked out just fine. And yeah, it was good. Had a good time.
I know you're not much for drinking in general, so that probably hit you quite hard, drinking the wine. Did you have a hangover the next day?
I didn't, thankfully. So that was, yeah, I think what was that, Saturday? And yeah, I didn't have to work the next day. So, but I didn't have a hangover. I was doing all right.
All right, all right. And we also have the Raphael, the Portuguese psychologist guy from Hessian firm. Thank you, Raphael, for coming on.
Thank you a lot for having me again.
Yes, sir. So just to kind of jump into this tier list here. So I do want to advise, if you're listening on Spotify, we are trying to do a video of us putting together the tier list. So I am in command here. So as you can see on the video, we do have the first band up is going to be Immolation from the album Close to a World Below. So I think this is a really good album. I don't think it's great, especially the lyrics hold back some aspects of the album, like the song Father, You're Not a Father, and he sings about a priest raping him and strangling him with the rosary and all that, and it's really clownish to me, really cringy. So musically, I would put it about an A, but because the lyrics are so freaking cringeworthy, and lyrics are part of the music, so we do have to include that aspect. We can't just like, well, I like the riffs. No, there's vocals on here. The vocals are saying specific words, and the words are very cringy. So I would put it in a B. So I would put that booger right there into the B.
I agree with you on that one, actually. Later Immolation is good, but I feel like in a way they kind of have more heavy metal riffs going on, which is something that I would consider somewhat of a regression from their what I would consider their peak, which would be more like Here and After and Failures for Gods. Um, and also lyrically, yes, it's a bit corny, which also kind of downgrades it for me. I still think it's a good album, so I wouldn't put it any lower than a B. But yeah, my vote is on B for that one as well.
And I know this band is very near and dear to Shelley's heart. Shelley, do you agree with the B rating?
I think it needs to be at least an A, purely because a few episodes back we did a focus episode on Immolation, and we went deep into their discography, and I agree with Tyler in terms of their peak being around Here and After, but I think after that they had a very rare thing in death metal bands of their generation, in a 3-album run, Phase for Gods, Close to World Below, and Unholy Cult, where they developed their style. There was a very sort of consistent Immolation signature, not just in terms of the riffs, but also I think the drums played a very big part in that, and Bob Vigner's very idiosyncratic solos as well. And I think Close to World Below, sort of falling in the middle of that, is where they really managed to combine the sort of undulating, dissonant weirdness of Here and After with a much more like blunt, heavy, and yeah, to some extent groovy as well. There are groovy moments on there. They managed to sort of synthesize the two, and for me, that's why it is such a special album. I will freely admit there is probably a nostalgia factor here as well, because I've been listening to this album for many, many years. And yeah, I can't defend the lyrics, but so many of the albums I listen to have inane lyrics that I think it's part and parcel of it. And there's nothing wrong with taking a bit of humor from your favorite albums as well, to my mind.
Well, the thing is, it's not specifically being, lowbrow just to be lowbrow, like, a band like Gutted, for instance, where you take it into the cheese with the rest of the music and it's part of the package. Immolation is trying to be serious here, Shelley, and that was a very serious topic about priests raping children, and it just comes off as really, really cringeworthy. So I believe the lyrics are part of the package. There is another Immolation album on here as well that was released after the year 2000. It was Unholy Cult. That does not have as bad lyrics as Close to a World Below. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but again, like there are fucking Burzum lyrics that I take humor from. I'm not saying that Immolation were in on the joke, because I do think they take their lyrics seriously, but I think there's nothing wrong in taking humor from the art that you love. If anything, I think that's almost adds to the longevity of it for me, is kind of growing with the lyrics, either taking amusement from them, trying to reinterpret them. And I think it's specifically one track that you're referencing here, Father, You're Not a Father. The rest of the lyrics, they're serviceable. And Immolation, yeah, the lyrics are quite prominent. Ross Dolan's voice is quite clear for a death metal vocalist. But the overall package, I think, it still belongs in the A tier, especially for sort of the standards of the time and what they were going for. But if I am outvoted, but Raphael hasn't spoken up yet, so let's see what you think, Raphael.
actually, I had one more question for you, Shelley.
Okay.
Say the lyrics are actually very poetic, Byronic, and could stand on their own just as great wordcraft and all that, and very expressive about anti-Christian topics, essentially, because that's all what they sing about. But if the lyrics were top tier, like the best lyrics ever described, would you rate it as
Um, I would say it's still an A compared to Failures for Gods. I think that's between that and Here and After, they're like the two S tier Immolation albums. I would say Unholy Cult and Close to World Below belong in A. I nominated Close to World Below over Unholy Cult because I listened to Close to World Below a lot more. I think I think each track has its own identity. There's no filler on there. Every single track kind of speaks for itself and has undulating peaks and troughs, and I think Vigna really kind of goes to town with the rhythmic diversity, the melodic diversity, but as I said, melding it with the sort of dissonance that was a hangover from Here and After. And I think some of that was lost on Unholy Cult, much as I love that album. So yeah, I would still rank it as an A.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. As the lyrics are, it's just whenever I hear the song, the lyrics ruin it for me.
All right, okay. Raphael, what's your take?
Well, I'm kind of split here because I do think it's a very good album. As for the lyrics, I can't disagree with Jason, but yeah, I also do think that this applies to a lot of metal albums, even those that we find really good and great. And it's also something that we're kind of used to overlooking by now. On the other hand, I'm not sure if I'm okay with it being rated B because compared to, for example, Unholy Cult here, it's not just the lyrics, but also another aspect that contributes to it, which is that when I think of this album, the title track really is the most, the one that stands out clearly from the rest, at least for me. It's an incredible track, probably one of the best they ever did. And when I think of the best Immolation albums, like as we were saying, Here and After, I think every track has something special about it. So those two things in consideration make me, I'm not sure. I guess if it were an A, I wouldn't mind, but because of these two things, I'm okay with it being a B as well. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So
I'll bow to the majority. It's fine.
Yep. I get 2 votes. Remember that too. So I am controlling the tier list.
Democracy.
Yep. So and I started the podcast. So yeah, the next is the Hate Forest. I know this one's going to have mixed reviews, but when I heard Hour of the Centaur by Hate Forest, I thought it was number one, their strongest album, and I thought this was the Immortal album that Immortal hasn't been able to release in over 20 years. So when I heard Hour of the Centaur, of course, it's kind of bookended by 2 really strong tracks, but even the middle section, for what it is, it vibes really well and it's cohesive. And this was before the Ukrainian war, before people were all about Ukraine, and even Hate Force is even more amplified there because they're in Kharkiv, Ukraine, which is really, really close to that Russian border. But actually they pronounced it, they silenced the K as Kharkiv. That's how they pronounce it. So the K in the beginning. But anyway, so honestly, I was taken by surprise from this, and I still view this. The Hate Force came out a few years ago, and a couple years ago, and I still view it as the best metal release coming out in recent memory. So I would personally rate it as a B. There, like I said, the middle section, it doesn't really offer as much more than like the first and last tracks. It just kind of meanders, in that typical Hate Force vibe, emulating Immortal quite a bit. So I think that holds it back a little bit. If it was all strong material like the first and last track, it would definitely be close to an S tier, honestly, in my opinion. But being that the middle section, it does kind of meander, I'm going to rate it a B next to the Immolation. All right, I know there's going to be mixed reviews on this. So go ahead, Shelley.
Well, yeah, for me, so it's their first album in 15 years, and I would say it is the very definition of getting your mojo back. It's a strong recapitulation of what Hate Forest were about. I wouldn't necessarily say it's their strongest album, but it was.
Would be their strongest.
I mean, I rate Battlefields, but I think I'm in the minority there. But for me, yeah, it came out the gate very strong, really kind of reiterated what Hate Forest are about. But for me, it's once you know what Hate Forest are about, that's it. You kind of, it's almost like listening to an album. You just get that vibe from them, and they're really good at providing that. But as you kind of alluded to, it does kind of wane a little bit in the midsection of the album. So for me, I would say it's probably a C, just because a good Hate Forest album is still kind of B tier for me. And sorry, not B tier, C tier for me, just because it's you kind of know exactly what you're going to get. You're not going to get any surprises or any kind of innovation, even sort of in a minor way. They know what they do really well, and they, people, their fans like what they like from them.
I
So
believe on the last track there is some innovation because, correct me if I'm wrong if you're listening to this episode, but I believe there's a section in the last song where they're not even using like a guitar pick, they're strumming their finger on the electric guitar on the string. So and that creates like this strange like atmospheric sound, and they used it to great success, I believe, in that closing track. So I think the production value on this is also one of my favorites from Hate Forest. Purity, and you said Battlefields, but I feel like Purity was really good too but they kind of hid behind the production, so the riffs didn't have that much going on with them, but the production with how muddy it sounds, you have a hard time really discerning it, all the riffs that they're playing, and your mind kind of fills in the riffs that they're not, or the notes that they're not playing. So I feel that this one you can hear what's going on, other than that one section where I think they're strumming the strings with uh their fingers and not a guitar pick. So I think once we get over to Tyler and Raphael, uh Hate Forest may be a drop down on the tier list here. What are your thoughts, Tyler?
So Hate Forest is a band that I'm somewhat unfamiliar with. I'm not knowledgeable about their discography. I have listened to this particular album at your recommendation. I listened to it one time and it wasn't bad, but I didn't think it was all that distinctive. They had some complex fills and transitions, and they were able to make good use of an effect of a kind of suspension of darkness, and I thought that was indicative of their being accomplished musicians. But there was nothing about it that made me really feel like it rose above a generally average black metal album. So I'm really torn between giving it a B if I'm feeling it not feeling nice, or going what I would consider the more safe route and giving it a C, kind of leaning towards C.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I understand that you're really, really into the logic behind the riffs, which is great. That's why we're listening to metal, is, mainly the riffs. However, I feel like with once we get to like Samoth, Godless Arrogance, it's not 100% about the riffs. It's about how the whole band comes together and how the music is orchestrated between all the members. And I feel that with a couple of these tracks on the Hate Force, they do kind of have that specific type of dynamic where it's like you don't focus on the riffs essentially. I mean, yes, I'm kind of trashing it by saying there's a vibe to it, but it's a very, very powerful vibe that you don't find in the vast majority of black metal coming out nowadays. But Raphael, what do you think?
Well, I'm not really sure. I mean, I do think that the songwriting here is a bit well, it's a bit of a repetitive album, if I'm honest, and therefore I think that speaks on some sort of limitation on their part. It's one of those bands that really stuck with a mode of songwriting and just kept it forever. However, I do think that given the overall strengths of the album, the intensity, and just the things that they do right, I'm okay with it being a B, to be honest. So yeah, that's my take.
Oh, you're okay with it being a B? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Why don't I just position it between B and C? Hold on here.
It's graduated.
No,
Yeah,
I'll put it between B and C. I'll put it like right here.
Yeah, for me, it is a common thread between like Ukrainian and Russian bands, Yig, Forest, Hate Forest as well, and Walknut. Like they achieve a vibe incredibly well, and they really kind of hit that post-Burzum kind of strain of atmosphere. But once you've experienced it, they don't really take it anywhere. Like I love it, I could listen to it all day, but yeah, it's not, as Tyler alluded to, it's not really doing much in the riff department. It's more just creating that atmosphere. And if that's what you want out of it, then yeah, that's where you go. But
it's all about atmosphere, like Drutk. Not sure if that's how you pronounce it.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel that Hate Force is way better than Truth, though.
I would agree with that, yeah. But it's the
I
same
agree
guy,
with that
so
as well. Yeah.
But okay, so we have the first contender for S tier here. We do have the Graveland, Memory and Destiny, and I remember when this came out, and I absolutely loved it, and I keep revisiting it over and over and over, and I still love it. So I want to go ahead and put this in the S tier. Um, the
Ooh.
we can talk about it, Shelley. But I feel that Graveland has two sides. Graveland has, the primitive folkish type of black metal they came out with early on. And then they have the like epic keyboard heavy type of post, late Bathory worship and all of that. And I feel that Memory and Destiny is the greatest example of that. And there are some tracks on there, like the song Legion of Giants has my favorite black metal riff ever in it. And with the keyboards behind it and all that, it's just a great experience. I've always come back to this album throughout the years, and it always makes me feel like really satisfied when I listen to it. It has, like the term familiarity breeds contempt. I don't get that with Graveland at all with Memory and Destiny. So I'm just gonna start out, put it in the S tier. Um, Definitely one of my favorite albums in the black metal genre that happened to be released after Metal Shut the Bed. So all right, Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Uh, no, sorry. It's not a terrible album. For me, Graveland, after Immortal Pride, it just all bleeds into one for me. I love, as you alluded to, I love the early Graveland. I think Following the Voice of Blood is a particular peak for me. And I like Immortal Pride and Creed of Iron, but after that, he just Darkin kind of hits his stride and just starts doing the same mid-paced sort of Bathory come, sort of melding in what he was doing with his other project, Lordwind. And it does just all bleed into one homogenous blob for me. So I can't really distinguish one album from the other or one track from the other. I
Oh
mean,
no,
maybe
no, this
maybe
one's
Fire
different.
Chariot of Destruction is a bit of an exception there. Like, don't get me wrong, none of it's terrible, but for me, it all bleeds into one.
Oh man, you're missing out. Memory and Destiny is where it's at with uh later Graveland. All right, I'll let Tyler speak his words on it.
Okay, so first, before I go into it, what ranking would you officially give the album, Shelley?
I would say B.
B? Okay.
Yeah,
So
at the most.
I would give it an A, because I think this album is phenomenal. I really enjoy it. I would give it an A purely for the fairly simple reason that I think that Graveland's earlier material is superior. So it's kind of just a relative judgment. I like their early material a lot better. My personal favorite is the Celtic Winter. I even like their very weird early demos. I love Thousand Swords, um, Carpathian Wolves, all of that material the most. But out of their later material, some of it which I think is kind of lackluster, especially after Memory and Destiny, with some kind of picking back up the pace on some albums like Thunderbolt of the Gods. Um, I think that Memory and Destiny, as Jason said, is the greatest example of their later style, and really do truly enjoy the album. But I don't know if I would put it as an S tier. For me, S tier would represent what I would consider some of the greatest metal albums of all time. I know this is just relative to the past 23 years. But yeah, I would give it an A.
Hmm.
Hmm. Raphael, you're gonna have the deciding vote again.
Yeah, well, I love the type of sound that Darken is doing here, and which he helped pioneer, I believe. And I love this album as well. I do agree with Shelley, however, that ever since Darken started to do this type of sound, he pretty much all the albums sound a bit kind of the same. I do think this is one of the strongest of this phase, probably the strongest even. For me, it's an A.
All right. So we have two A's, a B, and an S. So I believe that puts it into A territory. And Just on the record, I do believe it is an S album, and everyone should check it out. Spend some time with it. All right. Next up is Gorguts from Wisdom to Hate. This was a Raphael pick, which is I didn't expect that. So, I haven't listened to this album in well over a decade. This came after Obscura when they were playing around with the avant-garde type of quasi Shostakovich Bartok style on, simplifying it on for extreme metal. I would put From Wisdom to Hate at a C because Obscura is a better expression of the style that they're going for. What From Wisdom to Hate always seemed like a bonus to me. Like it didn't seem like the complete package as Obscura was. So I'd put that at From Wisdom to Hate at a C. How about you, Shelley?
Yeah, so if like in theory, if Obscura is S, the reason I would put it as S is because I know we're talking about From Wisdom to Hate, but just comparing it to Obscura, it's not because Obscura is particularly pleasant to listen to. It's because no one had done anything like that in death metal at a time when death metal was waning. This was 1998, and it was so stuffed full of information and originality and like provocations that it's an album that it's like a 5-course meal. And I do tend to agree that From Wisdom to Hate is like an extension of that, or like it focuses in on a few aspects that were like explored on Obscura and unpacks them a little bit more. But I would definitely say it belongs in A, maybe between A and B, just because it's not terrible. I think it does bring something new to the table on top of Obscura in terms of like putting some of those ideas under the microscope. And because I hold Obscura in such high regard, and it is a comparable album, I think it at least belongs in the vicinity of A.
All right, Tyler, what are your thoughts?
I would give the album a B. I think Obscura is a great album, and it's funny that all of the conversation about this album is kind of revolving around the album that preceded it. But I think that From Wisdom to Hate isn't as distinctive as Obscura, and that may just be unfortunately due surely to the fact that it followed it. When it comes to Gorguts as a whole, I much more often listen to their first two albums, especially their debut, than even Obscura. But I think that Obscura was the album that raised the bar. I think that also on From Wisdom to Hate, they kind of streamlined some of the elements on Obscura, and almost simplified them in a way. The themes almost are less adventurous or less experimental and a little bit more straightforward. And in that sense, I think it's a great death metal album, especially for its time. And I think that it can be enjoyable to listen to from time to time. But honestly, I revisit this one very infrequently. And where I would consider an A album as a mark of a truly exceptional effort by a band, I think that this album doesn't necessarily hit that mark for Gorguts. I think it more so hits the mark of not average, which is what I would consider C, but above average. So yeah, I'll settle with a B on this one.
I mean, I listened to Erosion of Sanity a hell of a lot more than Obscura or From Wisdom to Hate, just because I do find that style so challenging, whereas Erosion of Sanity is just a really imaginative death metal album. And I think to some extent there's a kind of tendency for these albums to be guilty by association because they did spawn a lot of terrible music. Like I don't think you'd have Dillinger Escape Plan if it wasn't for, or like a lot of math core stuff if it wasn't for this era of Gorguts. And much like Suffocation before them, you can't hold them responsible for what they created in terms of lots and lots of terrible deathcore and slam and whatnot. But at the same time, it does kind of tarnish the legacy of these albums to some extent. Not that you can hold them responsible for that.
Yeah, current dissonant death metal trend is kind of really following in Gorguts' footsteps. For a long time, they were more so doing like the kind of shredder element in that scene, but nowadays with bands like Ulcerate and a few others whose names I can't remember because they're all so terribly boring, they all have been really trying to imitate Gorguts on Obscura and perhaps this album as well.
All right, it sounds like Raphael's going to be the dictator again of where this one is placed. So it's either going to be an A, B, or C. What do you think it should be, Raphael?
Yeah, well, I think this album is the perfect synthesis between what they experimented with on Obscura, which was groundbreaking, and the more, as Tyler was saying, the more streamlined, the more, let's say, normal type of death metal. And so yeah, I think it's of course, if you're looking for some really wild avant-garde stuff, Obscura is the way to go. But yeah, I can't help but find that this album is still extremely well accomplished and well-rounded. I think it's basically, as I was saying, the perfect balance between the more avant-garde and experimental tendencies, which you do have a fair share of them here, and the more and songwriting more similar to more akin to, let's say, Morbid Angel or something like that. So for me, it's a very special album. I think there's not that many albums that occupy this sort of liminal in-between state. So yeah, for me, it's an A.
All right, so that was, I believe, me doing a C. Kind of cancels out an A into a B. Shelley said it was between an A and a B, and
Yeah.
Tyler said it was a B, I believe. So I'm just going to put that in a B here, the B. All right. So my concern is we're going to be too pragmatic about all this, and nothing's going to end up in D and F, because essentially,
You don't know what's the album that's coming up next, apparently. So
I was going to say that as well.
well, I think Shelley may rate it higher than the rest of us, but Gateways to Annihilation by Morbid Angel. So I believe that this falls firmly into the C category. Because there are, for what it is with the bouncy riffs and all that, I think that's executed quite well. However, this stuff fucking spawned the shit like what Behemoth is doing nowadays. And it's more about just, catchy, bouncy riffs than narrative structure. This album does have some songs that do have narrative structure, which is why I put it above a D. But the goodness of this album is definitely eclipsed by the bad traits, I believe, especially with we talked about this before with the song Opening of the Gates, where they actually use some studio trickery to make Peace Sandoval's double bass drum sound even faster than what it really is, and it's actually not humanly possible to perform. They did that at Morrisound, some studio trickery to get that effect. And that song is actually really not even a good song at all. And I saw David Vincent play that with Morbid Angel back when he rejoined the band before he did I Am Morbid, and it was really, really strange hearing his voice doing a Steve Tucker song. But yeah, I view that Formula's Fatal to the Flesh is definitely around an A. It is kind of bloated, but what followed was kind of just like a more I don't want to say polished, but more like accessible version of Formula's Fatal to the Flesh. And there's some great solos in it. And there are a couple of good songs. It starts out pretty strong as an album, but as it progresses, it gets weaker and weaker. And this comes from me. I got this when this album came out. I'm still a huge Morbid Angel fanboy. But after all these years, being acquainted with it, I see the flaws that are in it, and I think it's definitely average in the C territory. How about you, Shelley?
Okay, so I'm not going to get carried away because we are talking about the band that made Blessed and Altars and whatnot. So I'm not going to say it belongs in S or A. I think it is a B though, and the reason for that is I disagree to some extent around the characterization of it being polished. Although it is, I think that's quite a good thing, because here Morbid Angel were basically proving that they could maintain the same kind of labyrinthine, twisted, kind of Lovecraftian vibe, but at a much slower pace, or a mid pace. They had done slower, tracks in the past and slower ideas in the past, but here, I know there are faster passages throughout this album, but they maintain that mid-paced vibe throughout, and I think it works really well for them. It fell down when they tried to do it on Heretic, of course, and yeah, I tend to agree. Maybe even Formulas is a superior album, but I think here they managed to capture that the same kind of Morbid Angel magic, but with a much slower, almost cinematic vibe. And like I said with Gorguts as well, you can't hold Morbid Angel responsible for what the likes of Behemoth did with that sound. Like, it's not their fault that it was kind of dumbed down even further and became, this kind of blackened metalcore or whatever Behemoth ended up doing. So for me, it belongs B at least.
And Skeptic Flesh and a lot of bands have tried to emulate the bouncy type of riffing and Tyler, what are your thoughts?
F. I don't like this Pantera death metal album, kind of classic rock squeezed through a death metal filter. If it has a saving grace, I would say it has more distinctive riffing than Heretic for sure. It has some powerful moments, as almost every Morbid Angel album, barring the last two, does. There's some really interesting use of technique, especially in the lead guitar department, that might be useful for a student of guitar to listen to. But I have no motivation to listen to this one whatsoever. I was a big fan of it when I was about 15 years old and just discovering death metal, but over time its interest has really waned for me.
Dang. Okay. Raphael?
Yeah, this one could end up being like a C minus. What do you think, Raphael?
Well, I think the only thing that keeps it from being an F for me is really, this might be a very cliche opinion, but it comes down to the solos by Trey Azagda. Some of them are really creative and very interesting to listen to. But overall, I think it's just really a question of personal preference. I just really don't like the type of sound that these, almost Pantera-esque, shugcore type of thing. So yeah, for me, it's a D.
I do believe that puts it into a D. I'm sorry, Shelly, but the wisdom of the group here averages this as a D.
They've gone from wisdom to hate.
The people have spoken.
All right.
I'll concede to the majority.
All right. Desecresy, the Doom Skeptron. I kind of chose a specific album because the first four Desecresy albums are all very similar with the execution. And I feel that this one perhaps has the best production. Is probably the most accessible of the bunch. And honestly, there's some tracks on the Doom Skeptron that I have played on repeat, back when I was working out a shit ton, running on trails. I play the Sleep of the Titans nonstop over and over and over. That was like, if I had WWE entrance music, it would be the Doom Skeptron Sleep of the Titans. So honestly, and when I went to Finland last year, I did hang out with Jarno, who does vocals for this album, and he gave me a copy of it, by the way, and I've been jamming that in my car, even though I've been listening to it a lot beforehand on the streaming services. But I also saw where like in Helsinki there's a library and there's like a recording studio in there, and that's where Jarno recorded his vocals for the album, was actually in a public library. You just imagine him, growling into a microphone and all that. I would place it as a B. There's some great freaking tracks on it. There's some other tracks that I feel that it's missed opportunity, that they could have been made a little bit better. But as a whole, it is definitely above average. And I know we're talking about the best of, metal releases. So this is, high marks. A B is very high marks, and I would put it as a B. How about you, Shelley?
I definitely agree with B. As you say, like, once they hit their stride, the first four albums are almost interchangeable for me, in a good way, in that they really hit on something that no other band was doing. They did it well. I might have nominated Cosmic Transcendence just because I find the rough, abrasive, mechanical kind of production on that album slightly more compelling. But yeah, it could have been any one of the first four in terms of that dark industrial bolt thrower sound with the really kind of trippy, not even guitar leads, they're kind of just hints of ideas that kind of make it very weirdly atmospheric. So, but yeah, as you say, it is a style that can be somewhat limited. I do sometimes wish they develop it a little bit more. A lot of the tracks are very short, but not that complex. And that is good in itself, but I sometimes wish there was just a little bit more development at times. So yeah, I think it definitely belongs in the B category for me.
All right. Yeah, we agree on one. All right. Tyler.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to kind of cast the deciding vote here because I would also place it as a B. I really enjoy this album, and as I do much of almost all of Desecresy's discography, except for one album. And but I think that the album as a whole doesn't, it lacks in the developmental department. Like Shelley said, I would give Cosmic Transcendence a rating above it just because while it may lack that development song to song, it does have a kind of a sense of, in an almost ambient manner, having a development throughout the album, whereas this album does not have that as much. It does have really strong and powerful moments, and it is an excellent album to listen to. So I don't think that giving it a B is necessarily besmirchment of it. But I think that it's not strong enough to be considered, like I said, an A album being like an excellent effort by a band, like a high above average effort. So I would give it a B.
All right, Raphael.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a really solid, well executed album, and particularly creative for the time it is. Surprisingly creative. I also agree that their discography is relatively homogeneous. I think I would prefer Cosmic Transcendence, but anyway, this one is pretty good. So yeah, B, it's fine with me.
All right, everyone across the board says a B. That's strange. All right, oh shit, we got Demoncy now. Or Demoncy, however you guys pronounce this. Enthroned is a Knight. I view it's a very great album for what it is, but it's not a universal type of album for me where I can put it on and just immediately enjoy it. I have to be in the right mindset or mood to enjoy it. And in that regard, I would place it as a C. I know some of you guys may view it higher than a C, but it's not something that I revisit often. And he does kind of sound like Smeagol from the Lord of the Rings movies on it. So I'm gonna place it as a C. Shelley?
Well, 2 for 2. I definitely agree it belongs as a C. I think it's a really quality USBM album, sort of emblematic of that style, post-Von style, where it's, some elements of Black Funeral, Profanatica kind of belong there as well, where it's just, and, it sort of borrows a lot from Beherit and very dark, very atmospheric, very primitive. But yeah, it doesn't, again, a bit like we were talking about with Desecresy, it creates a really compelling vibe, and there are some great riffs in there, but it is a little bit limited for me. Still a great album, absolutely. So yeah, totally agree with C, I think.
All right, let's just end it there. That's a C. Let's move on to Celtic Frost.
Absolutely not.
All right, Tyler, what do you think?
I would give this album an A. Actually, it's going to shock everyone, but over the years, it's become my most listened to Demoncy album. I think that Joined in Darkness is phenomenal, one of the greatest examples of USBM in the entire history of black metal, and probably the album that is superior for black metal purists.
Tyler, he has nipple rings. That puts it in a C automatically.
Oh, I didn't realize that was like
I'm joking, dude.
Yeah, that was part of the grading process.
I just
my apologies.
I saw his nipples were pierced. I'm like, oh man, that's like
Yeah, that did creep me out too. But yeah, I think that it's an excellent album. It executes kind of a both death metal and black metal riffing style wonderfully. Has a lot of one of my favorite aspects of Demoncy that comes through full force on this album, a kind of melody that I would describe as terrifying in its kind of darkness and Hatred. I really love this album. I listen to it quite often because I like really straightforward death and black metal. I've ranted multiple occasions that the album I listen to over and over and over again is Morbid Visions. And in some ways, although through different methods, this album kind of falls into the same camp for me. It's really straightforward, awesome flow of dark melody that twists and morphs throughout the album, and it's one that's a high repeat listen for me. So yeah, I would put it as an A.
I don't agree with that. All right, Raphael. Do you see?
I haven't listened to in a long time.
I mean, it doesn't have staying power. If you haven't listened to it in a long time, you're not compelled to revisit it, very often. So
also that because I was tending to agree more with you and Shelley. I think it's relatively solid, but just not that good. I think I would rate it higher if it were within the Sylvan Realms of Frost. I think that's my favorite from Demoncy. But this one, I agree with a C.
All right, 3 C's and an A. That averages out to a C. So Celtic Frost, Monotheist. I would put this as an A. And I know you guys
are going to go straight for Esther.
Well, we had the Celtic Frost episode, and you guys convinced me that I have personal attachments to this album that are very subjective. Okay. And in regard to that subjectivity, I would place it as an S, but I agree that it is not the perfect album. But when Celtic Frost gains their stride in the album, it is some of the best, return to form type of material out there. And like the second half of the album is definitely S tier in my opinion, but there is that first half which kind of experiments around with a lot of different things. There's like a gothy type of sound going on, and even like a rockish song, the Dying God Coming Into Human Flesh. That could be like a rock song. So I do believe those elements kind of hold it back a little bit from being, when we say S, it's timeless. Actually, yeah, I'll put it between an A and an S. All right. All right, Shelley. I know you're going to say it's a C.
No. I would have said between B and A because after everything Celtic Frost had gone through by this point, I mean, who on earth would have predicted they release an album like this? It is a great album and it has lots and lots of highlights. But as you alluded to, The Dying God Coming Into Human Flesh is a little bit bratcore rock angst kind of stuff. The goth stuff, obviously I enjoy it, but I think it doesn't quite fit with some of the other tracks. And I do tend to agree the second half of the album where they really stretch their legs, it does reach for S tier. But for me, it's a little bit too unfocused, a little bit too bloated. But don't take that as me poo-pooing the album. I think given where Celtic Frost were at the time and where extreme metal was, it's still an absolutely fantastic album. So I'd put it between sort of B and an A.
All right, Tyler.
Man, I'm really fighting against the majority here with these last two. I would put this as a C, maybe even. Nah, I think I would say a C, maybe kind of a D. I'm not very fond of this album. The two-step riffing that you especially see in the first half of the album, as has been alluded to by Shelley and Jason, is something that I don't find very compelling. I get that it was a lot stronger than their prior material for a long time, since at least into the Pandemonium or to Megatherion. But I'm just not. I just don't find much about this album that really makes me want to listen to it. So yeah, I think I would probably settle on giving it a C rating.
All right, Raphael, tell me it's an A so I can place it higher.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's even strange to judge this album against all these others, because in many ways the appeal that I get from it, in a sense, is very different from that I get generally from metal. As you were saying, the album is it's sprawling stylistically. There's a lot of there's literally god rock numbers. There's some more industrial stuff, some stuff that's more it sounds more like the rock that of that era, but it's all well executed. I think the biggest problem with this album is the fact that I think the band has admitted it themselves. They were working for years on a lot of material, so they had this really huge mess. They had amassed a really huge plethora of material, and they really didn't know how to filter it exactly. So the album is very sprawling. I wouldn't want to say incoherent, but some songs definitely do not seem to mesh as well with the whole. But so I think it's impressive that anyway they managed to create such a very despite all of that, they managed to create such a powerful ambience. And I also have a very personal connection to this album. I think it's an incredible comeback, probably one of the best in the genre. So yeah, for me, it's also despite all these flaws, I would say the staying power is so much that the end result. For me, it's an A. Yeah.
All right, so I rated it an S or A and a S. Shelly was an A and a B. Tyler, did you say D?
C.
C? Yeah, I'll just keep it there in between an A and a B. I think that kind of averages out. Or let's just put it in A. Yeah, let's just
I think A fits with the general opinion on it, honestly.
I'll live with A, yeah. I think that's fair.
All right, Blaspherian, Infernal Warriors of Death, R.I.P. Wes. Wes was a cool guy. I really liked him. He had always stayed in touch online with me, as well as whenever I was in Houston, he would always come by and say, "What's up, Jason? How are things going?" Blah 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 blah. A really good guy. And Blaspherian, I had the opportunity to see them live a few times, and I missed that grumbly death metal vibe that they have, because I've never heard such bass heavy death metal in a live setting as I have with Blaspherian. However, that being said, I feel that it is a very strong death metal album, but when we're talking about the best of extreme metal albums, I would put it slightly above average into a B. I don't revisit it that often. I do like it when I listen to it. I think it's above average, but I don't think it's great. How about you, Shelly?
Yeah, I've not listened to this for 2 or 3 years, but from what I remember of it, it's really like vibrant, energetic, percussive death metal. There's a lot going on to like about it. But it didn't sort of grab me in the way that some of the best of the genre has. So I even for sort of the era. So I think I'd put it about a C, sort of rank it the death metal equivalent of the Demoncy in terms of like really quality, really kind of solid stuff, but not as compelling as some of the albums we're discussing here in their field.
All right. Tyler.
Man, you all are gonna put this close to a world below. I can't believe this.
Close to World Below is one of my favorite albums. Of course I
am. I would put it as an A tier. I actually think that out of the old school death metal revival, that one, Blaspherian was well ahead of the game on all of the other bands that were doing that, even the good ones. And I would consider it almost the best out of the revival death metal albums. I love this album. I listen to it all of the time. It is very much in my style, old replays Morbid Angel CD or Morbid Vision CDs until they're worn down in my car stereo kind of taste person. So yeah, I would put it as an A. I think it's absolutely freaking phenomenal. I think that it has a really awesome sense of intentional evil creeping in and overtaking something with the kind of melody that it makes use of. It's very powerful and energetic. Some riffing that almost reminds me of Asphyx at times, but also some riffing that kind of harkens to Immolation and Incantation as well. Makes a really good use of lead melodies. Yeah, I love this album. It's absolutely amazing.
Okay, yeah. I'll re-caveat what I said. I haven't listened to it in a few years, so I'm happy to bow to Tyler's like more intimacy with this album. So maybe I need to revisit it on that basis. So yeah, maybe my ranking will be a little bit weaker in terms of this album.
Raphael, what do you think? Blaspherian Infernal Warriors of Death.
Yeah, well, like Shelly, I think my judgment kind of coincides with Shelly's. I haven't really returned to this in a long time. I do think it is out of that revival movement. It's probably among the very best. I think it's really, from what I remember, it's really well done. I think that the slower passages, together with the overall sense of pace and song construction, it's really well done. But probably, because of my my tastes, I would say not enough to stand out. So I think it falls into that category of well-rounded, pretty good releases. So yeah, B for me.
Yeah, I think that falls into the B category. Sorry about that, Wes. But yeah, you're in good company here in the B category. Rest in peace. But next up is Beherit Engram. Yeah, that's definitely an S. So I'm just going to move it up there to an S above the Celtic Frost. All right. All right. Next band is Asphyx. That's the brutal way. Yeah, that's staying in S. So let's move on
Yeah, I
to
agree.
Asphyx, Death the Brutal Way. So this one, it kind of like definitely gave credence to like the OSDM revival. All of a sudden it came, and this good catchy album, but I think it's done more damage than good. I mean, for Asphyx, it's a good album, but for what it did to like all these imitators of old school death metal, it just gave them more footing to thrive. And Dark Descent, getting a nice house in Colorado and all of that. So I'm gonna put this as a D.
Oh,
Really, man?
No,
So-
a C.
so for me, I do agree, and it did start like the what I call the manor warring of death metal, in that they just started singing about how awesome death metal is, and you get that in the title track on this album. But the album around that is completely solid. And again, like we're talking about a lot of comeback albums here, but again, we're talking about some of the stronger comeback albums. And I never, pegged Asphyx for releasing an album like this in quote unquote twilight years. I would definitely rank it at least a B in terms of the quality. I return to this album frequently, almost as much as the Rack, to be honest.
Oh,
I'm with Shelly on this one. I would put it as a B.
all right.
I don't
Raphael,
think
do you
it's
say it's a B? Raphael?
Now I'm more towards the C rating as well. I think even if we don't take into account the what it spawned and the more contextual aspects, I think just in itself it's not that good for me, especially when you compare it to the earlier stuff by the Rec, for example. For me, it's a C. It's just not that good. I think not that. Well, it's enjoyable to listen to, but not anything else. Not more than that. Yeah.
All right. Sorry for stepping on you, Tyler. That was rude of me. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good. No, I was just gonna say, it's a solid album. I don't think it's Asphyx's best by far. And there's some aspects of it that are a little bit too streamlined for me, which would make me hesitant to put it in the A ranking. But it's pretty good. I would say it at least deserves a B. The next album is most definitely an S tier. Shelly, Raphael, you got to back me up on this. This is an S tier album we're getting ready to talk about here.
Averse Sefira.
No.
So I know Jason's already queued it up for F, but let me make my case for it. I know we're not going to get Jason to budge on this, but for me, it's the perfect synthesis of like that USBM style we were talking about earlier with death metal. You can definitely hear like an Immolation influence creeping in, and to some extent, it's almost slightly progressive as well. And the unusual, it constantly like churning time signatures and churning odd chord shapes and stuff. But I think Averse Sefira, I'll freely admit they're quite a cold mechanical band. They don't have the magic of a lot of black metal bands and that sort of.
It's pulled like a medical examination.
Yeah, it's sort of spontaneous
like autopsy.
mysticism.
It's like, let's pull out the innards of what comprises all these bands that we like, and let's rearrange the innards and the corpse of what we love. And
no, but I'd say like
band that they come into it, granted, and we talked about this a little bit before this episode, is that Sefira with Jeff and Sam, they started out as DJs in the college station, in Austin, talking about death metal, and they made fun of a lot of black metal. And
yeah, but all the death metal dudes did that at that time, man. There's tons of death metal guys from that time period. I mean, they're older than us who have
but did
outright
they
told.
record Madonna covers? No, they did not. Come on, Tyler.
Well, yeah,
I
but
mean,
like,
Come on.
I don't care if they made fun of like black metal at the time. Like everyone was talking shit at one point in all of these scenes, and Burzum recorded War, which is like a hokey Venom Bathory kind of tribute. Which there's every band has their moment of unseriousness. I'm ranking the album in front of us, and I think it belongs at least up at the B or A tier in terms of the sort of standard that we're talking about here.
No.
I mean, the Madonna cover is clearly a joke, right? Like, yeah, if you're downgrading them on that as if you think, oh, they've revealed that they're fans of Madonna, I don't think that applies. I mean, I'm not trying to overrate the album. The S tier thing was kind of a joke, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's F tier worthy. A lot of death metal guys made fun of that. Was like a universal acclamation of death metal at the time. I know some people personally from the death metal scene of the late 80s who, when black metal was first coming out, said that they hated it. A lot of death metal guys hated it. A lot of the Swedish death metal guys hated black metal when it first came out. You read Daniel Ekeroth's book Swedish Death Metal, and he said it was almost a universal consensus amongst the Swedish death metal scene that black metal sucked. They changed their opinion over time. But if you're downgrading Averse Sefira for it, it almost sounds like, oh, they were the only ones who didn't think black metal was awesome, and they even made fun of it. Now, that was a lot of death metal dudes.
No, the entire vibe that I get from Averse Sefira is that they're outsiders looking in, and they're rearranging the pieces as like essentially fans trying to be musicians. I do not get an artistic vibe whatsoever from Averse Sefira. I do not believe the music is authentic. I believe it's all fucking it's very try hard.
Okay, so there is a time factor here. So sorry to cut you off, Jason. So Raphael, why don't you weigh in, and then let's try and reach a compromise.
Yeah, well, I do really like this album, and I think it's way superior to what they were doing before. The earlier Averse albums are, well, they're not bad in my opinion. They're just a bit generic. But here I think they strike a pretty good balance between that more raw power and the tropes that you associate with black metal, with some more interesting ideas, some more technical stuff. That overall I think it's an interesting experience. I think it's a B for me.
Yeah, see, from my point of view, I'm not coming at it from the politics. I'm not from Texas. I don't care who they were, what they were on the scene, whether they were insiders, outsiders, or whatever. I think this is a fantastic album. I saw them, as I mentioned on our message thread prior, I saw them play it live touring this album in Leeds, and it was a fantastic show. And I think, given the standards of the period we're talking about, it's a really solid album and it belongs up there. I'm happy to compromise with a C because I know you've got very strong feelings about these guys, Jason, but
yeah, I would compromise with the C too. I think I would almost lean towards Raphael's putting it as a B, but I think I could compromise with the C.
Yeah, same. Well, maybe we should do the math, no?
Shelly, do you think it's better than Gateways?
Yeah, no, I definitely listen to it more than Gateways. I'd freely admit that.
Well, if we have 3 Cs and 1 F, what does that give? Maybe C, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shit.
Go on, you can do it. You can do it. Just move it on up there. Yeah, nice and solid.
All right, War Master.
The contempt in your voice.
All right. Oh, actually, I'm gonna put them down to a C, and the reason why, because War Master very competent, kind of bolt throwery, but more going on with it. But I am just not compelled to revisit it. I know they're cherished here in our group, but yeah, I'm just gonna put them in a C. Shelly.
Yeah, I'd agree, a C or a B. I think in terms of like the bolt thrower thing, mixing it with a bit of Entombed, it's really, really good stuff. And a little bit like the Blaspherian is kind of precursor to the old school death metal wave, but far superior in terms of what they were doing and their understanding of the form. But again, not like an album that really grabs me and, you know, justifies it being up in the A. So yeah, I'd be happy with a C or a B.
All right, Tyler.
I would put it in a B. I really enjoy this album quite a bit. I don't think it's quite as good as Blaspherian, which obviously I was more towards putting that in the A tier, but I do think it's an excellent album. Once again, that's with the caveat that it is kind of in my style of very, very straightforward, very little trimmings in the sense of experimenting with dissonant chords or odd time signatures or industrial elements or any of that other stuff that seems to be judged on our rankings well liked here. But I would say it's a B. That's pretty much my final ranking for this one. It's a really excellent, straightforward album. It has like a bolt thrower sound, but it combines it with a death metal sense of a greater amount of darkness and labyrinth and riff structures than bolt thrower makes use of. So that would be my reasoning behind giving it a higher ranking.
All right, Raphael, what do you think?
Well, I'll leave it to you because for this one, it's one of those cases where I don't really have many reminiscences of the album. It's been a really, really long time. So yeah, I'll just leave it to your judgment.
All right. Yeah, I think it's falling within the C here. So Absu, Tara, however you pronounce that. Honestly, it's like I love Absu because you know they're from Texas. Granted, there's other Texas bands on here that I don't love so much, but I hardly ever revisit Absu. I like what Prescriptor does. It's probably because it's a little too thrashy for me. It's not essentially like black metal. It's more thrashy black metal. And when I do listen to Absu and I'm in the mood for it, I do enjoy it a lot. However, it's just not one of those bands that I revisit very often. I like Prescriptor as a character in the extreme metal scene because he will talk about all this occult stuff rapid fire, and it's just like, yeah, wow, this guy is really into occult stuff. And yeah, I being that I don't revisit it and I don't really hold it in like bad regard, I'm gonna put it as a C.
Yeah, I only threw this album out because I actually forgot that it is in the 2000s and not a 90s album. But I think it's just where Absu really nailed the black and thrash thing. Their earlier stuff, although it had thrashy elements, it kind of went from occultist death metal to more occultist black metal with thrashy elements. But you know, there was a lot of weird eccentricity to it, a lot of like folky flourishes and stuff. Whereas here they go much more for the gullet of just full on like Slayer kind of style thrash with a really black metal element to it. And I think, yeah, it's a really solid album. But again, I'd be happy with C or B for this one. It's not, you know, not the best of this era, but it's really solid as far as Absu goes, and you know, the last of that era of Absu anyway.
Yeah, I had food poisoning one time and I put on this album. This was when I was up in Chicago for a while. And I connected with it immensely, but I don't have food poisoning every day, therefore I don't connect with it as much.
Wow, weird way to rate albums.
Tyler, how about you?
I would definitely say it's a C. Absu at their best is pretty damn good. I definitely prefer things like the In the Eyes of the Eoldenak, or however you say that EP. Their debut album is really cool, albeit simple, kind of dark death metal style. This album, it's good. It's not good enough that I ever really want to listen to it, or even if I'm in the mood to listen to Absu, that this is the album that I pick from them. But it's a good album for what it is. I'm never disappointed if someone turns it on. And it's a nice album to sometimes turn on a random afternoon when you're hanging with friends or something. Although that might kind of speak why I want to put it lower, because you know, if it's an album that I'm just turning on to hang out with guys and drink some beers to, doesn't necessarily have the profundity that would make me want to give it a higher ranking.
All right, fair enough. Raphael.
Yeah, I think I agree with the consensus so far. I think it's very well executed for what it is. It's a very energetic, pummeling album. But again, it comes down to personal preference. It's not really the type of stuff that I listen to. So yeah, I think Yeah, C is good.
All right.
Not for summoning though.
All right. Summoning. What are your thoughts, Shelly? Like, honestly, Summoning is one of those bands that I felt geeky to for like a week and got into a whole bunch. But honestly, ever since then, I haven't really been into Summoning. I can appreciate what they're going for, but
Oathbound is S tier. It's their best album after Dol Guldur for me. It's damn near perfect as far as like just full on geeky, like soundtrack, folky, ambient black metal goes. I listen to this album all the time, and I've loved it ever since it came out. It's one of my all-time favorite albums.
all right, Tyler.
I don't know if I would put it S tier. I would probably put it B tier, and I really like this album. I'm kind of a nerd though. You know, I spent last night building miniatures with friends. And I like to listen to a lot of like dungeon synth and other stuff like that while doing those kind of things, and Summoning kind of falls into that category. There's albums of theirs that I think are truly profound and great albums, much better than just serving as nice background material for playing Dungeons and Dragons too. But this album has some songs that I have a very personal attachment to, like Menegroth or Baleriand. But I don't think it's as strong of a contender for a high-ranking album as some of their earlier material, like Dol Guldur or the Nightshade Forest CP. And honestly, I don't listen to the album as a whole incredibly often, so I would settle for a B on this one.
See, I revisit the album as a whole all the time, and I think it kind of the thing that's special about this. I do agree about their earlier works probably being superior, but I think what's special about this is it can serve as background music to geeking out or just chilling out with a book or something. But it also, if you do listen to it just full on, just dive into the music, it has so many layers to it, even though it kind of presents as something that's actually quite simple and shallow. But as you dig into it, you just discover all of these really subtle things that are going on in the background for music that presents as so simplistic. But yeah,
like all of Summoning's great works, it definitely still has a strong sense of that uniquely summoning effect of giving you a very melancholy feeling, like you're wandering through a world that you've never been to and yet you miss. And I do give them props for being able to so consistently evoke that feeling on many of their albums.
All right,
Raphael.
Well, I love this album. Well, I love Summoning in general. I'm not sure if this is indeed the strongest after Dol Guldur, because I think their discography is generally very homogeneous. All of the albums pretty much bleed in with each other, even though, well, there's always some characteristics that make them stand out. But I think that on this album, on every album of theirs, they capture the atmosphere so well. They're probably the best band to capture this type of clandestine wandering in the woods, Lord of the Rings type of atmosphere. So yeah, for me it would be an S as well.
Oh shit.
Makes it...
Whoa!
I believe that puts it into A tier.
Yes.
What a shocking turn of events.
Yeah, plot
unbelievable scenes.
All right, I do need to take a 5-minute break, so I apologize.
How about the three of us discuss the rankings of the album so far while Jason is away?
Yeah,
well, I need to do the same, so I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Well, Raphael and I will discuss this then.
All right, go ahead.
Well, maybe.
You can leave it recording.
Raphael, the topic of discussion is how it's a crime that Demoncy is rated lower than Close to a World Below. Why would they do that to us, Raphael?
Yeah, to be honest, man, as I was saying, Demoncy is one that I haven't really checked that one very much. So for me, I mean, looking at it, for me, like the biggest crimes here, let me see. I mean, I think I agree with these in general.
Yeah, I think it's not, I don't so much, but I also think that's a matter of taste, right? I think that there's a kind of definitely a bent here towards appreciating things that are more experimental, have less of a riff focus, and more of like a kind of using a certain technique to develop atmosphere. It seems like there's a lot of love for albums like Close to a World Below on Shelley's side, Monotheist on Jason's side. I would think that Graveland kind of falls into that category. Same with Oathbound, and even Engram, although I agreed with its high ranking, kind of is more atmospheric, although it is very riff driven too. I lean towards more riff driven albums because I like albums that have a flow of melody that just focuses on the flow of melody alone, and almost has no other trimmings to it. And I think that's why I'm more trying to high rank albums like War Master and Demoncy and Blaspherian.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think that's the general tendency of the audience. That's why I think this is going to be pretty controversial. Not from my point of view, but from the point of view of what I imagine to be the general listener of this podcast. I think the biggest crime here is probably Immolation being B, because it's considered a classic album, I think.
oh yeah, there's tons of people who really love Close to a World Below. It's considered one of the strongest Immolation albums, at the very least out of their later period, if not out of their entire discography. Um, and I used to really love that album. Immolation was one of the very first death metal bands I ever really got into, and I loved every album they ever made, up to Shadows in the Light. Don't really like anything past that one so much. Um, and I used to listen to these albums all the time, but over time I started to become disenchanted with their material past Failures for Gods. uh Talking about like the lyrics that Jason was focusing on, I don't know if I have exactly the same criticisms he does about them being corny, but I do think they're much more personal, even though there was a personal element even on songs on Here and After. Like I Feel Nothing has a kind of a personal bent to the song, lyrically. But I think you have much more of that in their mid period or later period. And I think that's reflected in the music as well. Like I talked about how the music has more heavy metalisms in its riffing, which
I'm fine with
usually
that,
is,
though, to be honest.
huh?
I'm fine with the heavy metalisms, to be honest. If it's done well, I think Immolation does it well.
Yeah, I don't think they do it badly. I was more so saying that for me, it puts it at a lower
Yeah.
lower ranking than what I would consider their peak material.
Well, also because I'm same as you, Tyler, in terms of the fact that Immolation were one of the first death metal bands I really got into. But I think in terms of their anti-Christianity, they never felt as compelling as a Morbid Angel or a Deicide. They're very like mild-mannered individuals. The lyrics kind of sometimes feel like they're placed there because they need something to sing about, so it might as well be
Yeah.
I
anti-Christianity.
wholeheartedly
But
agree. Yeah, and
yeah, and it's
that's
sort
been a
of
problem of theirs throughout their entire career because
yeah.
they lacked that mythological scope, and thus they did not have as strong of a theme as other death metal bands like Morbid Angel did, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
and I think part of what I mean, I think Ross Dolan's got an excellent voice, but I think part of what made Immolation work was Rob Vigner being such a unique guitarist, but he was lucky enough to work with some really great drummers on From Here and After, and then I know they got a new drummer for Fails for Gods, but I think again he brought something really unique to the table and had a really great chemistry with Rob Vigner's riffing style. And then their latest drummer, his name escapes me, but he's a really good technical drummer. But I think that's where the downward spiral happened for Immolation because he was quite a generic drummer. It felt like he could work in any kind of tech death band, and it did sort of start dumbing down their style from there, and they became just any other kind of standard, slightly technical death metal band from, as you said, After Shadows in the Light, basically.
100% on board with that. They really kind of started to fit into the camp of like groups like Nile and Behemoth, although they sound different from those groups, but like socially as well as musically, they ended up kind of becoming part of that group of musicians.
Yeah. Right, I've got 1 hour. We've got to get through these quicker.
All right. Temples Forlorn by Temple of Abraxas. I would rate that as an A.
Yeah, 100% agree. This is one of our more obscure picks, released in 2019. But again, the guy from Transylvanian Funeral, we've had him on the podcast, Sleepwalker, really nice guy, but also really gets black metal. Not the most original act, and not like, reinventing the wheel or anything, but just working within a certain sort of style of mystical, atmospheric black metal that still has really strong, compelling melodic riffs. And on this album, he really nailed something about this kind of ancient mystical atmosphere combined with really elegantly simple riffs. And also, I know we've just been talking about lyrics, but the vocals and the lyrics work really well and bring a kind of lyricism to to this album. I think it works on a number of levels, despite its simplicity, which is why it's such a special album for me. And I've listened to it on repeat basically since I got hold of it.
He's a very intuitive type of musician, where he just gets things and he's able to be very expressive musically with that. And it goes back to A Transylvanian Funeral, with The Outsider, where that came out of left field. No one was expecting that, and he nails so many expressions of black metal at the time, where it was truly a gem, you know, hidden beneath the vast chattering of the mainstream metal scene. But Temples Forlorn, I feel that it's more a personal expression, like it is with you know, Tom G. Warrior type of, you know, very intuitive and Byronic. And yeah, definitely an A for me. Tyler.
Kind of like with Hate Forest, this album has been one that I listened to it at the recommendation of others, namely Shelley, and I didn't find much about it that was very distinctive for me. It was, you know, they definitely were able to accomplish having a cohesive atmosphere that they communicated through the music. It wasn't disjointed or badly put together like a lot of black metal bands can be in today's day and age. But there wasn't much about it that really made it rise above any other kind of release in this style for me that made me want to come to it more than classic albums that maybe had a similar atmosphere in part. I do give them props for having a song titled "A Thousand Swords," because if that's a callback to Graveland, that's pretty cool. That's good. That's good on them for doing that. But I would probably put it at a C personally.
Oh, interesting. I definitely think it's above average, Tyler. So I wouldn't put it as a C. But Raphael, what's your opinion on the Temple of Abraxas? Have you heard it?
Yeah, I've heard it, and I really like the album. I think it's, as you were saying, it's very intuitive. I think you can see that the musician has a very solid understanding of black metal and what makes it great. But you know, seeing the company that it has right now at A, I would personally put it at a B.
All right, so that averages to like in between A and a B. I can live with that.
Yeah, I'll take it. It is. I think Raphael makes a good point in terms of the company that it's keeping. So yeah, I'll
I
settle for
think
that.
it's good, but not that good, you know.
Yeah.
All right, skepticism, alloy. I'm gonna put that as a B, mainly because that I'm not really into like Doom that much, and skepticism tends to be quite doomy. Um, but for what they do, I know they are one of the best acts doing that type of style, and that's why I put it above average. But when it comes to skepticism, I'm not informed because I'm not really into Doom that much. Mainly just listen to death and black metal for metal. How about you, Shelley?
So for me, skepticism suffer from like the really strong debut syndrome in the Stormcrow Fleet. Their debut is one of the best, like not just doom metal albums, but one of the best extreme metal albums from the 90s. It is so good, and every single skepticism album since then is not just measured against it, but it feels like they're trying to recapture that. And I would agree that Alloy is probably one of their more successful attempts. It's a very different album to the debut. The production is beefed up. They really pump up the church organ, and it's much more of a riff-based album, whereas the debut almost functions like an ambient album in the same way that Burzum does, but from from a funeral doom perspective. So yeah, I would say in terms of if we measure skepticism in terms of them just trying to recreate the debut, Alloy comes the closest. So I think B is probably fair.
All right, Tyler.
I would, as a kind of exception to my trending so far with albums that I've rated highly, I would actually give this album an A for being a more atmospheric album. I really enjoy this album. I think that I like Stormcrow Fleet a little more, but this would probably be their next strongest release in my opinion. while it does rely much more on kind of a building of atmosphere than kind of the riff-driven approach that I tend to be more appreciative of, it kind of has a ring composition effect where it slowly adds to repetition to create a gradual shift in perception throughout the course of the music. And it also has some really excellent revelatory, powerful moments, like in the closing song on the album. So this is one of my favorite releases. Skepticism is a doom metal band that I return to pretty consistently, and this album is one of the ones that I listen to pretty regularly as well.
All right, Raphael, I believe you may have a unique take on this band. Go ahead, Raphael.
Yeah, well, I'm closer to Tyler here. I really love Skepticism, and I do agree with Shelley that the first is their best, but I would also say that this is the one that comes closest to it in terms of quality. So that alone I think is a feat. I think it's very rare for a band to come up with such strong material at this point in their career. And yeah, I think it's a very good balance between the more riff-based type of songwriting and the mode that they always engage in, which is more almost ambient-like and very atmospheric. So yeah, for me, this is very close to an S. I think maybe it only doesn't make it to an S because of again, it's not really their best compared to Stormcloak Fleet, and well, not all tracks. There are some tracks that stand out the more, whereas I think an S album would be one where the whole experience feels very charged. So for me, it's well, an A or in between an A and an S.
All right, I believe the general consensus of two Bs and an A and a high A puts it between a B and an A. So I'm just gonna leave that there. All right. I know Tyler's gonna put this in the S tier. Sam,
You would as well.
Yeah,
honestly, it like criticism I have with other bands, where I have to be in a specific mood, like Demoncy or Demoncy, how you pronounce that. I do have to be in a specific mood for Godless Arrogance, but when it clicks, it fucking clicks. I would put it honestly, especially compared to like Beherit being S tier, I would put it as an A plus. So I put it between an A and an S. All right, Shelley.
I can live with that. I'd definitely say it's at least an A. Just in terms of some of, I mean, they'd always captured that. By this point, when they released Godless Arrogance, they'd captured that very visceral, very primal sort of black metal. I mean, we'd refer to it as war metal, but we know what war metal is actually like in the public perception. I think that's doing it down. Samhain are onto something very different here. And as we've mentioned, this album, they managed to achieve that without actually focusing on the riffs so much. Obviously, it's an album made of riffs, but as you've talked about, Jason, there's an interaction between the guitars and the drums that really kind of
the bass has moments.
Yeah, it's sort of lockstep that really kind of unifies the entire delivery of this album and almost like makes it not ambient, but it's very sort of vibe driven in terms of like the exchanges of energy and the pulsing kind of flow from extreme speeds to slow droning chords and so on. So yeah, it's a unique album as far as like black metal this extreme and this visceral is concerned. And for that, yeah, it belongs up in the A. I'll be happy with between A and S.
All right, Tyler, I know it's an S for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this album is phenomenal. It was a crushing release for its time, really showed the rest of the black metal scene how it was falling short. It really does have an almost ambient quality to it, but unlike a lot of albums that go for that more atmospheric or ambient approach, it has a sense of development where it kind of guides you through a series of emotions to a very in classic heavy metal style, referencing the whole of the genre, not traditional heavy metal, leads you to a heavy moment, a sort of like profound revelation of sorts that is very powerful. Just an excellent black metal album and really refreshing to hear it in the kind of dearth of quality music that was around at the time or even around today.
All right, so that's two A's and an S. Raphael, you're going to you're going to decide where it goes again. Raphael, what do you think about Godless Arrogance by Samhain?
Yeah, well, I think I can understand the enthusiasm. I think it's a very powerful album, and especially when compared to the output that was popular at the time. I like the way they managed to creep in some melodicism in the midst of these songs. I do, however, I do feel like I like it a bit. After the first wave of Euphoria, when I first listened to it, I think I find it a bit not as good as I found in the beginning. So maybe I might be a bit of the dissenting voice here. I agree, it's a very good album. It's a tour de force to listen to it, but maybe because it's a bit repetitive, and I would put it maybe between B and A.
All right, that puts it firmly in A territory. Surprising, I'll put that between an A and S as I positioned it. But Raphael, you are the deciding vote on that one. Very, very cool. But yeah, I mean, this is still a really good company. When you look at these albums next to Graveland, Memory and Destiny, Celtic Frost, Monotheist, and Summoning, that's still very fucking strong as hell. And I kind of do view that the Beherit is a little bit better than the Samoth, which is really, when I say the word better, I just mean it meshes more and more levels for me than the Samoth.
Timeless.
Yeah, and with the Samoth, it's very specific, whereas the Beherit is broader, in my opinion. So that makes sense. I'm speaking in mystical terms over here. We have the Profanatica. Profanatica, I definitely above average in general about the band.
This is an A. Come on, it's an A.
Absolutely.
All right, I agree with that. An A.
For me, it could have been this, Disgusting Blasphemies Against God, or Thy Kingdom Come. Those three albums, all A's for me.
Yeah.
Profanatica are one of the success stories of post-2000 black metal as far as like these reformations are concerned.
I agree with every word of that. They have a masterful use of like just a simple, just straightforward, pure stream of melody, no fat, no trimmings. Excellent fucking release on this part. And yeah, the next couple of releases after this were also phenomenal. So yeah, I agree. A tier.
All right,
Yeah.
Raphael.
Yeah, I said I can agree with that as well with the general judgment. Yeah, it feels like a very an exercise in atmosphere, but a very good one.
All right, we all agree that Deathspell Omega is F tier, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
they suck.
All right, let's move on. Necros Christos. Necros Christos is a band that I think captures a lot of the right elements, but when it comes to the narrative structure, they really drop the ball. So I'm going to put them as a C, because where they do have moments that really remind me of like Celtic Frost and this broad extreme metal aesthetic, and they really excel at it. The song structures do not convey any like substantial development other than melodrama. So I would definitely put it in the average territory. How about you, Shelley?
Yeah, they're one of these bands that sort of listens to a lot of early Greek black metal, a bit of Smile, and obviously Celtic Frost, as you mentioned, but they get they get the technique of how to do it, but not the spirit. And it's always over bloated with content. The albums are too long and the ideas go on for too long. And there's not that efficiency or energy or love of the craft or understanding of the craft, I should say.
I just feel that when they get it right with the good sounding riffs and the aesthetic, and they have this, great aesthetic where they actually delve into like ancient Sumerian and Babylonian content in regard to the Christian Bible and the influences and all that. I believe they paint this great picture of what extreme metal is all about, which is kind of just being as blasphemous and anti-Christian as possible. And they definitely succeed in that aspect. How about you, Tyler?
I hate to say it, but I can't stand this band. Why does a band like this have 10-minute and 12-minute songs? There's only so long that I can handle the lack of ideas that they have to begin with. And honestly, I always felt like they only really succeed in communicating a very superficial atmosphere of teenage grimness. Like my French fries are cold and I suffer for it.
Yeah.
I think I can agree with that actually. I see what
it's knuckleheaded. Yeah, but I think that they're able to pull off the knuckleheadedness, like Gutted, that we spoke about earlier. But yeah, I assume you're placing them in F territory.
at the kindest, I would give them a D because I would put Gateways and like Deathspell as an F, and I would think that this is mildly better than those albums. But
Better
yeah,
than Gateways. That is cold.
yeah, better than Gateways for me, but pretty close. Sometimes, honestly, Necros Christos kind of almost reminds me like Down trying to play black metal at times with
All right,
like hookish
Raphael.
blues rock horses.
Raphael, you decide if it's going to be like a C or a D plus or a
Yeah,
D.
well, actually not because I'm not really familiar with the band, so again, I'm leaving it to you guys.
Okay, you're not casting a vote. All right, all right. I'm going to put them between a C and a D. I think that summarizes what our opinions are on this. So what was that next one? Oh, we got the Nocturnal Mortum. All right. So I've been to Ukraine numerous times, and the general vibe from other Ukrainians is I'm not Ukrainian, but from the Ukrainians, and the metal scene there is that they like old Nocturnal Mortum, but not anything newer. And this was in terms of like what year did this album come out? It was like
2009.
yeah, this is definitely a newer one. So I'm not really into Nocturnal Mortum. I did listen to them quite a bit when I was like 16, 17, but they did not have the staying power as like Graveland and other sketchy bands of that nature. So, yeah, I'm gonna put them in the average. Shelly, what are your thoughts?
So don't shit the bed on this. I think this album is an S. I think I don't really go in for jaunty folk black metal all that often, but I think here they managed to synthesize like progressive rock, Bathory, Viking era stuff, black metal, and the folk element as well. And I've never heard such a successful attempt to like marry all of these elements together. I think it's nearly a perfect album, and it's one of the albums that when I came across it, I came across it a bit late in the day. I came across it probably 2017, 2018. And I was kind of losing interest in extreme metal. I was getting a bit disillusioned by it. And then I found this album and it kind of reinvigorated my love for this music. So there is a personal aspect to it. But I think even compositionally, in terms of delivery, in terms of style, every aspect of it is almost perfect for me. So I would, to the chagrin of some, rank it up there with Engram.
All right, Tyler, what are your thoughts on that Nocturnal Mortum?
I guess that at best, I would say this band is trying to sound like later period Graveland, but honestly, to me, it really sometimes reminds me of like Wacken Festival style heavy metal, and it's got like a bunch of different pleasing parts that are meant to sound interesting with like varied instrumentation and really hookish anthemic portions. It oftentimes goes on too long, and I honestly feel like they don't really do much interesting with it. I would put it as a D.
Oh, see, I know where you're coming from because I know the exact kind of band you're talking
Oh.
about, and I don't really rate them either. But there's something going on this album where it works. I'm not going to talk you around to it now because I don't think I can. But this album just stands apart from that Wacken kind of style. Yeah, I think that's quite an eloquent description of it. But yeah, so I know exactly where you're coming from with the description, but I just think this album is just just cut from a different cloth, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, with the actual like metalheads in Ukraine, they tend to like the older Nocturnal Mortum more than the newer output.
I like old Nocturnal Mortum as well, but I think this one they just up their game a little bit and just really hit on a style. They haven't managed to repeat it since, but yeah. Raphael, what's your take?
Well, I happen to side with you, Shelley. I think this is one of a handful of bands, well, maybe less than a handful, that actually manages to accomplish these syntheses with more, more the folk style and more, the epic pagan warrior type of black metal. Yeah, I think the musicianship on this album is insane. The way they managed to mix all these elements together in a way that feels very harmonious and very purposeful. Yeah, it's a tour de force for me. I think it's well, maybe not an S exactly, but at least an A for me, or between an A and an S.
All right, so that firmly puts it in like Temple of Abraxas territory. All right, so let me reposition that. And I do apologize, Raphael. I do not remember the name of that band that you had recommended, but their album cover is there. If you want
Okay,
to, if you want to
like
talk a little bit about it, because I have not heard it, so I'm withdrawing my vote.
okay, so you want me to introduce them?
Yes, because I have never heard of them before.
Okay.
I don't
So
know anything about the music.
yeah, so like Heavy Flame, it's they're pretty much they fall into technical death metal, I guess, but they're very unique at that. They one of the things that they managed to do, one of the most the strangest things that they managed to do is to play a lot with major key melodies and melodies that feel very anthemic and just generally positive. Overall, very warm. Let's call it that. But at the same time, they mix in some tropes from more brutal death metal. The vocals, for example, are straight out of brutal death metal. The intensity is there, the blast beats, some of the more intricate songwriting, that falls into, as I said, into technical death metal. Some really cool examples of start stopping, with really really elaborate, but at the same time very accessible melodies. For me, this one is an A. It's I think that what they managed to do is something very unique, very rare, and even rarer is the fact that it works. So yeah, an A for me.
Interesting. Shirley, have you heard this band before?
No, apologies. I'll freely admit I didn't get a chance to check them out before they were dropped in, so I have to withdraw my vote as well. But based on Raphael's description, I will have to check them out.
Yeah. How about you, Tyler?
Man, this is gonna make it hard to place this one because I am not a big fan of this band. I used to listen to them a lot when I was really young because they were interesting and that they were doing things, at least aesthetically, that were novel. But I honestly think that the music is almost completely random. Uh, their riffs are sometimes related. Um, uh, they kind of have a rhythmic continuity at times. And they try to tie it together with a sort of lead guitar candy that is almost like reminiscent of like traditional heavy metal. Um, but I would in this style of bands that try to be very experimental and progressive, I would maybe put them uh above something like Cynic. Um, honestly, at times it kind of reminds me a bit of some of the work by Cryptopsy, although Cryptopsy is less disjointed than this group is. But yeah, I would put this group probably at a D, just because I feel like it doesn't really gel very well. It doesn't really have a gestalt. It's kind of random for me.
Yeah, I'll put that between a C and a B because
Yeah,
Raphael holds it in high regard, and you put it in D territory. I think that kind of equals out. All right. This one should generate some good debate. We have the Mephitis Ember Dawn. I know this is a personal favorite of Shelley's. Tyler and I have kind of talked offline in the past about this band, and we kind of share the same sentiments of what we uh what we believe that they're succeeding at and not succeeding at. So honestly, I like Gateways more than it. So I'm gonna put it at a
Whoa! Okay,
Yes.
so let me just talk around it for a little bit. So, released in 2019, I did want to get in a more recent release into this list, and it was released at a time when I was just begging. I was hungry for this kind of music. I was just wanting someone to do something with a little bit of imagination. But with the benefit of 4 years, I will admit that maybe there's a bit of the Averse Sefira kind of complex going on, and that on paper, what they're doing looks incredible. It looks like everything that we've ever wanted, but there is that failure in the point of execution that, as Tyler said in our Norwegian black metal episode, that lack of wildcat genius going on. But that being said, I would still rank Ember Dawn as an A or a B tier in terms of its imagination, its originality, the sheer talent behind what's going on, and the fact that no one else is really doing that style in the last 5 years or so. I think if we're going to complain about extreme metal being really stale and rank these days, we can't complain about albums like Ember Dawn because it's doing everything that we're asking, and I think it succeeds more than it fails in that regard.
I feel that way more about the next album on the list. This album, I think the musicians are sincere fans of quality extreme metal, that they understand the spirit of the genre, but I think it is entirely too self-conscious. And as a result, it is too artificed, which probably, as Shelley said, relates to criticisms I would have of Averse Sefira, although I would rank them higher because they actually make use of themes that have some emotional power to them. I don't really hear that as much from Methodists. Their music kind of seems like a tour of this is what quality technique in death and black metal is, but it never really comes to make a statement other than that, in my opinion. So I would actually put it as a D. I'm kind of with Jason on this one. I do think it's better than Gateways, but that's about the nicest thing I can say about it.
I thought I'd have to talk you and Jason around, but I didn't think I'd have to talk you around to being above Gateways. But well, there it is. Anyway, Raphael, let's not let the Hessian firm factor sort of bias us in terms of judging this band. What's your take on them?
Yeah, no, actually, you'll have to talk around me as well. No, I'm joking. Actually, I think they're really good. I think they do strike a fine balance between making an homage to what they like, to the classic death metal that they like, but at the same time doing something new and something unique, something that is distinctively their own. I do think that their best album though is not this one; it's the one that came after, Off Scourings.
Off Scourings, yeah. I did like mull over that, and I just went for Ember Dawn, maybe because it feels more spontaneous, but Off Scourings is the more like clinical option, I think.
Yes, so but in any case, I would also rank this one the same as you. I would rank it as an A. So I'm not sure. I have no idea how that evens out in the end.
That's between a B and a C.
Probably, yeah.
To be honest and not thrusting my opinion above everyone else's, yes, somewhere between a B and a C. So let me go ahead and move that there. But what I feel like the issue is with Mephitis is, logically speaking, they get down, the logical side of death metal, but when it comes to like the soul and the spirit, there's a disconnect. That's what I personally feel. The same criticism that I do have for Averse Sefira, as others had mentioned. All right, next album is that Kever. So I don't even think this is an album. I think it's more like an EP. Primordial Offerings, I believe is what this is called. Kever from Israel. This came out of nowhere, and it was quite good. I would say it's above average, but not great. So I would put it as a B. Honestly, I know Tyler, you might have it as an A, and Shelley, I don't know if you spent a lot of time with it, but
no, they were new to me when we did our OSDM episode last week, so I've only listened to the album once. I'd place it around a C, but I might withdraw my vote on this because I'm not that familiar with it.
All right, Tyler?
I would definitely place it as an A. Everything that Shelley said about Mephitis, however you say their name, I feel about Kever. Kever has a really...
You're right. Yeah, Kever gets it. They have the spirit, so yeah, they're above Mephitis.
Yeah, exactly. They have, but they have a strong sense of theme, unlike Mephitis does. They have like a statement they're actually trying to make through their music, that melodically they communicate through their music. It has powerful moments that logically are a result of the development of the riffs. I think Kever is one of the finest examples of newer old school style death metal bands.
All right, Raphael, you have any thoughts?
A bit like Jelly, I haven't spent a lot of time with this band, and I don't really remember it a lot from. But I think it's. I would put it in a B from what I remember. I think it's relatively. It's very well executed, and they do have an understanding of the genre. It just didn't grab me that much, so yeah, a B for me.
All right, sounds good. I'll just keep it where it's at, because I think that kind of evens out. All right, Vader Litany. All right. I have a guilty confession. I really liked Vader when I was a kid. So there's nostalgia. I feel that Litany is definitely the tail end of when they put out decent material. Um, but yeah, this D. It's D. I'm sorry. If anyone likes Vader out there, it's a D. This is like Vader painting by the numbers. All right, Shelly, your thoughts?
I mean, I wouldn't play down a love of Vader. I think Ultimate Incantation is a fantastic album, and they're one of these bands a little bit like Master in that once they found their comfort zone, they kind of stuck there, and they do it really well. And I think Litany is a really great example of that. I wouldn't rank it up. I think Black to Blind, released in '97, is the superior album, but obviously it's excluded from this for being post 2000. But I think if we're going to have a Vader album, it would be this, and I think Vader belong on this list. That being said, yeah, I wouldn't rank them much above a D. It's sort of it is you know what you're getting from Vader by this point, and they're not doing anything particularly original or special. It's just quality, kind of old school death metal with a slightly freshy vibe. Yeah, not much more to say about it, to be honest.
All right. I know Tyler's going to say they're enough, right?
No, I would probably say a C maybe or a high D. I really like Vader's early material. The Ultimate Incantation is one of my favorite death metal albums of all time, and I listen to it constantly. Uh, it's right up my alley. And this album, like you said, is like the tail end of quality Vader albums, if not maybe about the last like truly quality Vader album there was. But that being said, that's about it. The highest praise I have for it is, oh, it's a good, not bad Vader album. Um, so in that sense, it's like maybe above what a lot of other albums that were coming out at the time were achieving. But yeah, if I was being really nice, I might give it a C, but I would say maybe more like a high D.
All right. All right. Raphael.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree a lot from the general consensus. I would probably, I think a bit higher of them. I would probably give them a C. I think it's very enjoyable for what it is. It's Vader channeling a bit of Slayer, more of a trashy mood. I think it's a very enjoyable record, but yeah, compared to what we're dealing with here, it's not really groundbreaking in any way. Yeah, C but I'm okay with a D anyway, an ID.
Yeah, we'll keep it in the D. I think D is proper place for it because the earlier material does branch into like B territory, but this album is just very redundant of the style that they already had established, and they didn't really communicate anything new with it. So the next up is that Imprecation, another Texas band. One of the Texas bands on today's for some reason. Honestly, I understand that it's competent, but I never got into it. I'm just going to put it in the C territory. I do like Dave Herrera. I think he's a great frontman, but I just feel that I actually think the Mephitis is better than the Imprecation. Looking at the
Oh man, I can't believe you said that.
I think I mean, I obviously think the fighters belong all the way up in A, but I think Imprecation belong on a par with Blaspherian in terms of the pre-old school death metal stuff. They really nail like what they're doing, and I think,
but
yeah, I think
it's not the same personnel as like the early demo compilation and all that. I think Dave Herrera is definitely an original member, but
yeah,
um
but like their comeback stuff, if you want to call it that, again, like with Blaspherian, like with Warmaster, it anticipates the ISDM crowd, but it outdoes it on every level in terms of really nailing what death metal was about and adding their own voice to it. And yeah, I think Imprecation is it's up there between B and A.
all right,
I'm
Tyler.
with Shelly on this one. I really like this album. Once again, it's not kind of album that's like really up my alley. I would not say it's as good as Blaspherian, or even Kever. So I would solidly put it in a B. But what it does really well. It's a
Blaspherian's
very
a B.
yeah, but I consider them an A. Um, but I was just saying by my standards. And Yeah, what they do, they accomplish really well. It's very straightforward, like kind of pure melodic flow style of death metal album, has a good sense of development. I don't really think they maintained that on albums after this one, sadly, but this one really kind of knocked it out of the park, and it was really for in the year that it came out, right place, right time. Just really was able to exceed everything else that was its contemporary. So yeah, I would give it a B.
All right, Raphael.
I was about to say more or less what Shelley said. I think in my mind they're in the same category as Blaspherian. I think they really nail that type of style, and they do something interesting with it. Although for my personal taste, not too impressive. So yeah, for me it's a B, I guess.
Well, I feel that the cover is definitely a tier above it. So I think the position that it's up now is good. Are you guys good with that, or do you want me to move it up to just a regular B?
I think regular B.
All right, I'll move it up to a regular B. All right, all right.
Yeah.
Above the Mephitis. You understand this is above the Mephitis, Shelley.
Yeah, I know, but I can't talk you two around in the time that I've got. So,
All right. Ooh, Unholy Cult by Immolation. So I would put this. Oh my goodness, there's pros and cons to this album. I think there's like 3 or 4 really great songs on this album, but I think that there's a lot of filler. But those great songs, I like to revisit them from time to time. In that respect, I would put them between an A and a B for Unholy Cult, by Immolation. How about you, Shelley?
well, obviously, I've already put my 2 cents in on Immolation. I think that Close to or Below belonged in the A or S tier. I think Unholy Cult is almost up there. I don't listen to it as often because I think there is slightly more filler on there. But the title track alone kind of puts it on an A tier for me. I think, again, it's just an exceptional showcase of Rob Vigner's talents as a guitarist and as a composer.
Yeah, polyphony and is very unique.
Yeah.
It's able to conjure up.
For me, it's at least an A tier.
All right, Tyler, what do you think?
I have the almost identical feelings to this to Close to a World Below, as far as me feeling like it's a regression with some more use of like heavy metalisms in its sense of melody, and thus thinking it's a good record, but a downgrade from their early material and not something that I listen to all that often nowadays. So I would put it in a C.
Oh wow. So you don't like the lead guitars on it? Like they're not special to you?
You know, I'm like not incredibly impressed with Vigna's like soloing. I don't think it's bad. I get why people get really excited about it. But maybe it's just because they have so many albums, but I've heard it enough to this point to where I can immediately identify when it's happening, which is perhaps a point in its favor. And so it's not exciting to me. I just hear it and think, oh, that's Vigna soloing. Even when I hear him guest on another album, I'm like, yep, that's definitely a Vigna solo. So yeah, it's not that special to me.
Raphael, what are your thoughts? Unholy Cult by Immolation.
Well, I'm happy with its current placing. Basically, I think it's superior to Close to World Below, not by much. I just think that generally the songwriting is more consistent throughout the whole album, and as Shelley said, it's an excellent display of the talents of Bob Vigner as a guitarist and as a songwriter. Yeah, very solid release overall. I think if it stays where it is, it's okay for me.
Yeah, I think the general consensus is staying between a and a B. All right, so let's move on here. We have the Sorcerer de Glosses, or de Gloss. I think that's how you pronounce it. So this is their best album. I think. What was it called? It's like the Full Moon or
Moonrise in Total Darkness.
Yeah, you're right. I feel there's a couple great songs on this album, but there's a lot of filler in it too. But what they get it right at a high level. So I would put it as a B personally. The song like In the Holes of Ice or whatever is like one of the best like modern black metal songs that I've heard in a long time. So yeah, definitely a B for me.
Okay. I mean, for me, like, yeah, this is sort of exemplary Canadian black metal along with Frozen Shadows. Like, that's what Canadian black metal means to me. But I think this is another artist that kind of was really carrying the flame at a dark time when there wasn't much quality out there. And I think the title track on this album has one of the best black metal riffs going in terms of its lyricism and the flowing melody that comes out. So yeah, it's definitely the best album. Maybe I'm being a bit too generous by putting it as an A. So yeah, I think I agree. B is probably a fair placing given its company along that tier.
All right, Tyler.
The Ice Wizards are kind of a one-trick pony, in my opinion, with how they structure songs and the effects that they rely on. I think that this would not be what I would consider their best album. That might be the Pure Essence of Primitive Forests or their debut album. It is a very solid black metal album. They usually almost always accomplish that, barring a few exceptions. They do have a very good grasp of how to lead songs to powerful moments, and in that regard I wouldn't say it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes their albums are so similar that I really just don't listen to them that often because I don't really know which one to pick to listen to, because I know what I'm going to get and it's going to be roughly the same thing regardless of which one I pick. So I would put it at about a C.
Huh. All right, Raphael.
I really like this band overall. I disagree that this is the best one. I think for me that would be the very first. But well, they're very consistent overall. I think as you were saying, you can count on them for delivering pretty solid black metal. Yeah, I agree with B.
Yeah, I think it stays in the B with a general consensus. Oh, and we have one last band, Grand Declaration of War by Mayhem. I know this wasn't Shelley's pick for the Mayhem album that qualifies within the time range that we specified. However, I think it's definitely the most iconic. Generally speaking, and Shelley can talk about how other bands have, used styles from other Mayhem albums, but Grand Declaration of War is the most overwrought monstrosity that Mayhem has put out. And yeah, but I like some aspects of it, but not enough to like really hold it in even like average territory. So I'd put it between a C and a D. How about you, Shelley?
Yeah, so for me, I think I'm in a minority here, but Order Ad Chaos is my favorite of the sort of later Mayhem albums. Purely not, it is responsible for a great deal of terrible dissonant black metal, which kind of has become very homogenous of the genre in the last 15, 20 years. But that particular album, I really respect Mayhem for going left field. But that being said, Grand Declaration of War was also very left field. But it doesn't work. Like, they're trying to be the classic Mayhem of old, even though most of the members were no longer involved in the band at that point. Hellhammer's doing his thing. He's an incredibly distinctive, talented drummer. And then, yeah, you have this weird sort of podium like vocals where it's half black metal, half speaking at a political rally. And I appreciate the attempt to experiment, but for me, it's just they're doing too much all at once. They needed to steady the ship, given what Mayhem had been through by this point, a little bit more. So they needed to, and that's what they attempted to Chimera, and it turned out to be rather dull. But that's kind of why I respect Ordo Ad Chaos, because it kind of synthesizes the two. But for me, this is not above D tier in terms of memorability or re-listenability. There's just, as you said, there's too much going on. There's too much to unpack. It's just one of those wonderful, noble messes. It's not like I criticize the album for trying to be cynical or whatever. I appreciate that it was a genuine effort, a sincere effort, but it just, yeah, it falls flat at the execution level.
All right, Tyler, any thoughts on Mayhem? Grand Declaration of War?
Yeah, I would also put them at a D for this album. I think that it is intensely overwrought, as you said. I feel that they have always been living in the shadow of their legacy, and that has resulted not at Methodist levels, but in a level of self-consciousness where they feel they have to make some sort of statement of discomfort or darkness that ends up being a bit superficial with how they attempt to go about that. And on this record, they attempted to go about that with a lot of randomness and dissonance that is very superficially applied. And not a big fan of this release, or really any of Mayhem's later releases. Pretty much the only thing I listen to from them is their debut album, and that's about it.
All right, Raphael.
Well, I'm probably the one here who likes his album the most. Although I agree with the general consensus. I think pretty much basically they're trying to play a lot with some ideas that are not in the end as successful as they wanted. In the end, it's a bit of a pretentious album, but I do appreciate in general what they're trying to do, and I like it. It's just that I think it's one of those cases where a band is trying to experiment with some strange materials, some even toxic, and in the end they end up not being able to bring that to an harmonious wall. But when it works, I think it really works. So for me, it would be a B. But I guess that puts it in between the D or the C range.
B or C. All right, yeah. So we have to move that slightly up. That's like a D plus. Oh man. Yeah, I'll move that C plus. I know we're running short on time, so I'm just going to put that there. Are you gentlemen happy with the tier list that we have created today with our discussion on this? Like Beherit being the best and Deathspell Omega being the worst?
I mean, I still think Summoning belongs up there with Beherit, but I'll happily compromise on the rest of it. So, yeah, I'm generally happy.
Well, I think Deathspell Omega should be above Averse Sefira, but yeah.
Yes,
We don't always get our way, so
yeah, but kind of feel like I'm kind of going to be along with everyone else for different reasons here. I am overall happy that many things are as high as they are, and many things are as low as they are, even though I have some disagreements about where certain things are placed. So overall, I think I'm satisfied with where it's at.
Justice for great ways.
Raphael, do you like what you see on the screen?
Yes, I think, like Eller said, there are some things I would have different if it was just me compiling it. But yeah, in general, some looks good to me.
All right. All right.
And with that, guys, I've got to shoot. So thank you for tonight. It's been absolutely awesome. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Have a good one. That was Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion Magazine. He needs to put his baby to bed. And
Good night.
Tyler, I want to thank you very much for joining today and having your input. I know it may not have gone exactly how you wanted it to go, but I think it's kind of interesting, pulling a lot of different metalheads and with their perspective on different albums and how they rate it. So we have this this thing that stands in front of us of this tier list. So thank you for your contribution.
You're welcome. I'm with you on that one, man. I think we had a lot of different but educated perspectives going into this, and I think it was really cool to see how we would consider a group of albums that, besides a few that we included kind of just as measurement sticks, were roughly at least in the caliber of this is a really good album. So I think that this was a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of fun. How about you, Raphael? I know you already said your words on the tier list that is displayed in front of our eyes, but I thought it was a fun exercise just to kind of place things with the democratic vote. So thank you for your contribution, Raphael.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I understand this is a subjective list for you listeners out there who don't agree with the albums we chose and our placings of them. But yeah, life sucks, and this is the best extreme metal albums from the knots to present. So cheers, and definitely like and subscribe, leave a comment, and call us stupid or whatever, but cheers.